history of people is not a straight line from primitive to advanced, nor is it a story of one species replacing all others in a clean sweep. It is instead a long, overlapping, and fragmented process in which multiple human groups lived at the same time, interacted, competed, cooperated, and ultimately merged. What survives today as Homo sapiens is not the result of isolation or superiority alone, but of absorption, inheritance, and adaptation. Much of what shaped us occurred long before written history, and much of it is missing not because it was hidden, but because the physical record was never designed to last. For most of human existence, there was no single humanity. Instead, there were many kinds of people. Early hominins appeared millions of years ago, gradually adapting to upright walking, tool use, and increased brain size. By around 2 million years ago, members of the genus Homo were already spreading across Africa and into Eurasia. Homo erectus, in particular, was a long-lived and successful form, persisting for well over 1 million years and laying the groundwork for all later humans. From these widespread populations emerged regionally distinct groups that would eventually become Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in much of Asia, and Homo sapiens in Africa. These groups did not exist in isolation. Genetic evidence shows clearly that Neanderthals and Denisovans split from a shared ancestral population and then diverged under different environmental pressures. Neanderthals adapted to cold, seasonal climates, developing compact, muscular bodies and immune systems tuned towards strong inflammatory responses. Denisovans adapted to a wider range of environments, including high-altitude plateaus and pathogen-rich regions of Asia, leading to genetic traits associated with oxygen efficiency, metabolism, and antiviral immunity. Homo sapiens evolved primarily in Africa, where flexibility, social learning, and rapid cultural change became defining features. When these groups encountered one another, they did not simply fight until one vanished. They interbred. This is not speculation but direct genetic fact. Modern humans outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA. These genetic contributions are not neutral remnants. They affect immune responses, metabolism, altitude tolerance, and susceptibility or resistance to disease. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed this reality in an unexpected way, as certain archaic genetic variants increased risk while others provided measurable protection. Extinct humans, in a very real sense, are still biologically active. The way these people lived together was likely complex and varied by region and time. Encounters may have included trade, conflict, imitation, and assimilation. Groups may have merged gradually, with cultural and genetic boundaries blurring over generations. Children born of mixed ancestry would have carried traits from multiple lineages, making rigid distinctions meaningless at the local level. Over time, as climates shifted and populations moved, some groups declined demographically, while others expanded. Absorption, rather than annihilation, appears to have been the dominant pattern. What is missing from this story is as important as what we have. Fossils are rare, especially in tropical and high-altitude environments where Denisovans are thought to have lived extensively. Bodies are often destroyed by scavengers, weather, or human activity before they can fossilize. Teeth and dense bones survive more often than complete skeletons, creating a distorted picture of past populations. As a result, some human groups are known primarily through genetics rather than anatomy, while others may be entirely invisible except for faint genetic signals in living people. These so-called ghost populations are inferred from DNA patterns that cannot be explained by known species alone. Because of these gaps, traditional narratives often simplify the past into a single lineage with clear stages. This makes the story easier to tell but less accurate. It also leaves little room for the idea that human diversity used to be far greater than it is today. People in the past may have encountered others who looked different enough in stature, face shape, or behavior to seem almost inhuman. In populations where average height was around 5.5 feet, an individual over 6 feet tall, broad, and heavily built would have been striking. Over generations, such encounters could become exaggerated in oral traditions, transforming unfamiliar humans into giants, wild men, spirits, or monsters. These stories are not evidence of non-human beings, but they may preserve distorted memories of real human differences filtered through fear and symbolism. Ancient myths and early historical traditions often describe a time before the current order, populated by beings who were stronger, larger, or more chaotic. While these accounts are not literal history, they may encode social memories of displacement, migration, and absorption. As groups expanded and formed early states, they reinterpreted the past to legitimize their dominance. Those who came before became demons or enemies of the gods, while the victors cast themselves as chosen or civilized. This process of myth-making obscured the reality that all these groups were human, sharing ancestry and biology. Traditional history usually begins with agriculture, cities, and empires, but by that time the major merging of human species had already occurred. The world that produced Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and early China was populated by people who already carried genetic legacies from multiple archaic lineages. These inherited traits influenced how populations adapted to new diets, diseases, and environments. They also shaped differences between regions, contributing to the diversity seen in physical traits and health outcomes even today. Another missing element in common narratives is the role of disease and immunity as a selective force long before recorded pandemics. Archaic humans lived in close contact with animals, parasites, and each other. Their immune systems evolved under constant pressure. The traditional story of human origins is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. It focuses on what survived visibly and ignores what persisted invisibly. Genetics has begun to correct this imbalance, uncovering relationships that fossils alone could not reveal. As more ancient DNA is recovered and more genomes are analyzed, the picture will continue to change. New human groups may be identified, and old assumptions revised. The true history of people, then, is one of shared landscapes and shared futures, shaped as much by chance and environment as by innovation. It is a history written not only in stone tools and ruins, but in bloodlines and immune systems. It is quieter, messier, and more interconnected than traditional accounts suggest. And it reminds us that to understand who we are, we must accept that we were never alone, and that what is missing from the record may be as influential as what remains. When Homo sapiens expanded into new regions, they encountered not only new environments but also new pathogens, and archaic immune genes could provide an advantage. This helps explain why some Denisovan-derived variants related to antiviral defense persist at relatively high frequencies in certain populations. These genes were not selected for modern diseases specifically, but for survival in ancient ecological contexts that happened to confer benefits later. The idea that human history is a story of gradual moral or biological decline from an original perfected state finds no support in physical evidence. Suffering, predation, and disease long predate humans. Human traits emerge through accumulation and adaptation, not degradation. There is no genetic or fossil marker of a lost divine condition. Instead, there is evidence of continual experimentation by evolution, with many forms arising and disappearing, leaving traces in those that followed. What shaped us most was not dominance alone, but adaptability. Homo sapiens succeeded in part because of cultural flexibility, but also because they incorporated useful traits from others. The modern human genome is a mosaic. This challenges the idea of purity or singular origin and reframes humanity as a coalition species. Our success came from sharing space, genes, and knowledge, even when that sharing was unintentional or occurred under pressure. Understanding this deeper history changes how we view ourselves. It reveals that difference is not new, and neither is coexistence. The sharp boundaries we draw today between groups are recent constructs compared to the deep interconnection of our past. It also shows that what we call extinction is often incomplete. Though Neanderthals and Denisovans no longer exist as distinct populations, their biological influence remains embedded in us, influencing health, adaptation, and resilience. The traditional story of human origins is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. It focuses on what survived visibly and ignores what persisted invisibly. Genetics has begun to correct this imbalance, uncovering relationships that fossils alone could not reveal. As more ancient DNA is recovered and more genomes are analyzed, the picture will continue to change. New human groups may be identified, and old assumptions revised. The true history of people, then, is one of shared landscapes and shared futures, shaped as much by chance and environment as by innovation. It is a history written not only in stone tools and ruins, but in bloodlines and immune systems. It is quieter, messier, and more interconnected than traditional accounts suggest. And it reminds us that to understand who we are, we must accept that we were never alone, and that what is missing from the record may be as influential as what remains.